You know, I had parakeets, I had fish tanks at various points, and I had these turtles, dime store turtles we called them. They were little turtles that you got with a plastic fishbowl. And later in my adulthood, I know they were red ear. They were a species called red ear turtles, and they were baby, immature red ear turtles, and probably should never have been sold the way they were sold by the millions in America in the 50s. Certainly, we didn't know how to care for them properly. That little half gravel, half water thing for them, and the turtle food they gave us to give them maybe wasn't the best healthy thing. But for whatever reason, the turtles never lasted long. You know, I would have 5 or 6 of them, and then one of them would just be dead. And since I kept them in the castle, it just one thing led to another, and I thought, well, they must be murdering each other, competing for the turtle throne.
What did you want to do when you grew up as an adult? What were you?
Well, it depends on exactly what age you ask. You know, at a certain point, when I was quite young, I wanted to be a spaceman. I loved the science fiction stuff. And we didn't even have the word astronaut then. We had spacemen. They were spacemen. Just you had cowboys, you had knights, you had spacemen. And other kids wanted to be a fireman or a policeman, but I wanted to be a spaceman. And then later, Mercury program came along, and I changed that to astronaut. But at some point, I guess around junior high school, I finally kind of took stock of myself and said, realistically, I'm probably not going to be the guy who goes to the moon, but maybe I can be the guy who writes about people who goes to the moon, because I'm pretty good at making up stories. Whenever I seem to make up stories, the other kids and so forth seem to like them. So, my parents were both blue-collar guys. My father worked as a longshoreman for much of my life. He also had a couple years where he was unemployed, so we struggled with that. We lived in low-income house projects. My mother took care of us kids when we were quite young. We got a little older. She got a job at Maidenform as a factory worker, and then a little later a manager. I was always a kid with my nose in a book. I think that was my middle name, not the RR. George Nose in his Book Martin. When other kids were out playing, I was reading a comic book, or later a book. I got a science fiction book, Robert A. Heinlein's Half Spacesuit Will Travel, from a friend of my mother's for Christmas one year, and that started me reading science fiction, and I've never stopped.
What fascinated you in reading? What was the attraction?
I think some of it was just to touch a broader world. As I said, we had very little money. We lived in the projects. We never went anywhere. Our family didn't even own a car. I lived on First Street. I went to school on Fifth Street. That was my world, 5 blocks. They were pretty interesting 5 blocks when I look back on it, but I didn't think so at the time. And through books and comic books, I could go to, you know, Metropolis and Gotham City. I could go to Mars. I could go to Middle Earth and the Hyborian Age, and Shanghai and Casablanca and wherever. So movies, television, books, comic books, all these stories gave me access to experiences that I could never have had in real life. And that I didn't know that I was ever going to be able to have in real life. Now, as it turned out, ironically, my ability to tell stories and the success of my books has given me access to the world. Witness the fact that we're now sitting here beside a lake in Switzerland talking about it. That's a long way from Bayonne. But that was a dream I didn't know that I would ever obtain. In my actual childhood, I look around and I saw so many people that I grew up with who generation after generation lived in the same town. Nobody ever went anywhere. And I wonder if whether that would be my fate as well.
Why do you still go to sci-fi and comic book conventions? What do you still get from it?
It's my world, man. I've been going there since 1971. When I first started going to those conventions, it was like I came home. These were people who shared my interests, who knew the same writers I knew, the same books, the same classics. We could sit down and argue about which was Heinlein's best book, or whether Cordwainer Smith was better than Clifford Simak, and conversations that would be incomprehensible to people who are not of the faith, so to speak. And there were also values in the science fiction community that that appealed to me. There was a level of warmth there, of tolerance, of acceptance, of all kinds of people were welcome there into that field. And it was a bright community. There's smart people talking about smart things, all of that called out to me. And most of all, I just had a good time at my first few conventions, and I made friends there. And once you've done that, you go back because you want to see your friends.
Do you remember how the idea of Game of Thrones came about and where you were at the time?
Yeah, this is a story I've told about 10 million times, but I was writing another book. It was the summer of 1991. I was mostly working in Hollywood, but I didn't have any current assignment right at that time. And I started a science fiction novel I'd been thinking of for some time called Avalon. And I was working along at it, and suddenly the first chapter of Game of Thrones came to me. I don't know where it came, it was just there. The chapter where they find the direwolf pups in the summer snows. I knew that it was the summer snows. Somehow that phrase was right there, right from the beginning, which said something about the world that this took place in. I didn't know whether it was a short story or a novella or a novel, but it was there so vividly I knew I had to write it. So I put the other book aside, started writing that, finished that chapter in about 3 days, moved on to another chapter, and here we are today. So.
And do you have any writing rituals?
Nah.
No. Well, why do you, because do you still use WordStar?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because it's good. It does everything I want it to do. And it doesn't do, perhaps most importantly, it doesn't do the things that I don't want it to do. I mean, I have two computers. I have a computer that I go up on the internet with and check my email. And that has all the current programs on it, including the latest version of Word, which I do use occasionally. And it's just if I may pardon my French here, a pain in the ass. It has too many functions, too many bells and whistles. What do I need 75 fonts for? I just want words that I can read, in a nice, clear, readable font. I don't want help. I don't want it correcting my spelling. I'll correct my own spelling. I know how to spell. I learned it in grade school. And I'm using a lot of made-up words, so when words start constantly correcting my spelling, or a word constantly correcting my spelling, it's just an annoyance. It corrects. I type a lowercase letter, and I get a capital letter for whatever reason. And then I have to go back and erase it and tap it again. And it's so damned annoying. And, I've had people tell me, well, you can turn those features off. And then they go in and they fiddle with my computer and they turn them off. But they don't somehow turn all of them off. There's still some annoying things. WordStar is just a basic, solid program. It does exactly what I want it to do. It doesn't do anything that I don't want it to do. And perhaps even more important, although I didn't realize it at the time, it is as stable as a rock. I mean, I've had friends who've lost novels to viruses and worms that they've gotten on the internet that have somehow infected their computer and gotten on their files. Well, my computer isn't even connected to the internet, my writing computer. It's entirely separate. So it would take a real disaster of unprecedented magnitude for anyone to get to destroy my files. And I can't get any worms. I can't get any viruses. No one is writing viruses for DOS anymore. So, all of this makes it considerably safer. I think there's an obligation on a writer, any writer, to tell the truth as he sees it. even in fiction, I mean, even in fantasy, yeah, we're talking about dragons and kingdoms that don't exist and imaginary made-up people. So we're not dealing with real facts, but we are hopefully dealing with real truths. And writers are trying to express how they see the world and how they see humanity when they talk about things like that. And so these issues are important to me. They do reflect some of my views of the world and human life. And I don't know, like you could say good and evil, but my view of good and evil is very different than a lot of fantasists where it's very external, and it's guys in white cloaks versus guys in black cloaks. And from my mind, I think the battle between good and evil is waged within the individual human heart and goes on constantly. So I can only speak with authority to what's in the books. So for example, Theon being gelded isn't in the books.
Okay.
There are hints about it.
Yeah.
There are hints, and yes, I suppose I can reveal, yes, that did happen to him, but I never showed it, and I haven't even actually fully revealed it yet. It will be fully revealed in this next book when we will finally hear about it. But the show made a decision to put that on screen and reveal it earlier, and that was their decision. So, but I'll handle it in my own way in the books, and you know, we can talk about that if you want. You know, I elected to keep most of Theon's torture scenes off screen, not because for any moral reasons, because I think it would have been horrible to reveal those or whatever, or too disturbing. I don't object to disturbing the reader or upsetting the reader. Sometimes I think the reader needs to be upset. But because I don't think they added, what happened to him was important to the story, but actually seeing it happen wasn't necessarily important, and there was a lot of repetition there because he underwent that for 2 years. So in the books, the way I handle it is Theon is captured and in fact knocked out, and you think he's dead because the last thing you hear is, and the rest was darkness. And then we don't hear from him for 2 books, and we hear contrasting rumors about, oh, he's dead, oh, he's not dead, oh, look, here's a message with a piece of his skin. Well, maybe they're bluffing, maybe they killed him, and how do we know whose skin this is? I mean, the whole issue is left up in the air until Reek comes back, the character Reek, who is the transformed Theon. It's you know, the Stockholm Syndrome turned up all the way. He's been thoroughly broken. His very identity has been taken to him. He's been turned into another person by not only physical torture, but mental torture, mind games that have broken down his personality. And when Reek is first introduced, I didn't even want the readers to immediately know that it was Theon. To think, oh, there he's introducing a new character here. Who is this new character? And then a page or two, you get a few clues, and you figure out, oh, this is Theon. This is what's become of Theon. The things that have happened in my books, people say, oh, it's shocking, it's disturbing, it's horrible stuff. But if you actually read history, the real history of the Middle Ages, I'm a piker compared to the things that really happened in the Middle Ages. Not only things that happened, but things that happened so regularly that they were unexceptional, rather. That people accepted them. People just, oh, this is the way of life. We lose sight of that, I think, in the modern age. But I've emphasized that in some recent interviews where issues like this have come up. You know, history is written in blood. We like to read about the great men and the wonderful things they did and progress. And indeed, we have made progress. We've made an enormous amount of technological progress, and I think there's also been moral progress that the human race has made. Not that we're there by any means, but we shouldn't overlook the fact that the history that a lot of this is built on is a very bloody and violent history for century after century, and that's a truth we should recognize if we're going to write about historical fiction in particular, or fantasy, which you know, borrows from history to look at it. One of the things I was reacting to when I wrote A Song of Ice and Fire is some of the fantasy after Tolkien, not Tolkien, but the Tolkien imitators who came after him, a lot of them created a sort of Disneyland Middle Ages. You know, sort of Middle Ages like you might see at a Renaissance fair where everybody has the colorful costumes and they say prithee a lot, and, you know, you have the jousting and the feasts, but you don't have the dysentery or the torture or the leprosy or the innate sexism or classism or racism that was so built into so much of that world for so many centuries. You really have to take, you know, I like the knights in the shining armor and the heraldry and the pageantry as much as anyone, but you also have to include the fleas.
And yeah, all that. And how much do corporations today have in common with the feuding families in Game of Thrones? Because it's all about conquering, and it always is. It's just I find that the methods have changed. It's not as bloody anymore, but there's still that idea to conquer. And that's no longer. I think it's no longer nations that try to conquer, but corporations.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. They use less violent means, I think, which is not to be despised. I would rather someone use a less violent mean on me. I don't want to be, you know, tortured as Theon was. I'd rather be swayed by advertising in deciding that I wanted, you know, a Starbucks. But you know, I showed at this convention the Neuchâtel International Film Festival, fantastic. They asked me to show 3 films. One of them I showed was Casablanca, which, of course, at the heart of it is Sam sings as time goes by and has a line, and it's all the same old story, a fight for love and glory. That may be the truth of our human existence here. We all want love and glory, then and now.
Okay, but do you feel like if like the family crests in Game of Thrones, could they be replaced by logos today?
Well, you know, I think they have been, to tell you the truth. You see the corporate logos and trademarks everywhere, and you don't see the old heraldry of the houses and the families anywhere. Well, you do see national flags. You know, I've been over here in Europe since I've been here. The World Cup has been going on, and there's been, every time I turn on a TV or hear people shouting in the streets or at bars, it's all the World Cup, my team versus the other team. We don't get a lot of that in America because we don't follow soccer very much, but you know, we get that in the Super Bowl, and you know, I get a upswell of pride when my team, the New York Giants and the New York Jets, do well, and I hate the Dallas Cowboys like the Starks hate the Lannisters or the New England Patriots. So we have these groupings that we adhere to that bring out the same functions in us. You know, I think one of the things in human history that is a sign of progress is the way we define us versus them. I mean, if you go back all the way in history, the us was very small. You know, the Greek city-states warred against each other. You know, they were all Greeks, but the Athenians were Athenians, and they didn't like the Spartans, and the Spartans fought the Thebans, and the Thebans fought the Corinthians, and so on. And the only time they ever got together were the Persians invaded. But your identity then was not I am a Greek. They had that identity, but it was a secondary thing. It was I'm an Athenian. My loyalty is to my city. In the Middle Ages, you saw the ideal of the family and replaced that. The Starks and the Lannisters, or the Yorks and the Lancasters. I mean, one of the things I've drawn on is the 100 Years' War, which is taught in school as a struggle between France and England. It wasn't a struggle between France and England for most of it. It was a struggle between the Capets and the Plantagenets, two great warring dynasties. And then later the Wars of the Roses were 2 different branches of the Plantagenets who fought till both branches were essentially extinguished and the Tudors came in. So there were family things. Nationalism really rose later. And then we had the nation states that we identified with. But I think as we identify with larger and larger groupings, that's a good sign of human progress. You know, I mean, one of the great things about my own country, the United States, that doesn't get all talked about as much as some of the other things we hear a lot about in America, and you probably hear about it here too, about the American Revolution and the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. But to my mind, a really key thing that doesn't get a lot of attention was that the states did unite, that they became one country. And that was finally settled for good, I think, in the Civil War. But if you go back to the early colonial days, New York and New Jersey, my own state, had armed conflict between them. There were brief wars between Ohio and Michigan and other things like that. I imagine the United States had not united, had become 13 separate countries. Inevitably, there would have been wars between those countries. Instead, there were disagreements, but within a framework that allowed them to be settled peacefully. And I do think that's the way that the world has to go if we're ever going to achieve any kind of permanent peace. I suspect that people like Robert A. Heinlein had a lot to do with me thinking that. The science fiction that I read so voraciously as a kid, so much of that was set out among the stars. And when we went out among the stars, we were Earthmen. I was used to thinking of as Earthmen, and maybe there was a Russian in the crew, and maybe there was a Chinese guy, and maybe there was an African, but we were Earthmen. We weren't from 17 different countries. We'd fight wars. We'd fight the Klingons, or the Martians, or some strange species, some alien species out there. But we at least had identified into one common humanity, and ultimately, that's the way I'd love to see the world to go. Whether it will actually ever get there, I don't know. I mean, I see forces pulling in both directions, and on one hand, I see the EU, which seems to me to be a very good sign, a United States of Europe emerging. But on the other hand, I see centuries-old countries like, Spain, parts of it want to secede, Scotland voting now whether it's to secede from England, Yugoslavia breaking up into 7 warring parts. And so there's the urge to get together and the urge to split apart. And every place in the world seems to have immigration controversies going on right now. Certainly my own country does, the United States, but following the news here in Europe, I'm seeing a lot of it in Europe too. Every little bit of Europe doesn't want other people coming into their little bit of Europe. And I don't know where that leads.